With the necessary access holes now available, the uplock cables, the aileron control rods, and in the left wing, the aileron trim tab cables can be connected. Let's see what goes on inside that wing he's reaching into. To connect the uplock cables, the ends of the cables from the fuselage are drawn into the wing. The short cable from the fuselage is connected to the long cable in the wing through this access hole. The long cable from the fuselage is connected to the short cable in the wing through this hole. These connections are made with the turnbuckles, which are drawn up to a tension of 25 to 30 pounds. On the back side of this spar is a micarta guide block, which we see here. The cables are threaded through this block. Now, the aileron control rods. There's an access hole in the cockpit floor here. By reaching down through this hole, we can secure the rod with this bolt, washer, and elastic stop nut. In the wing, the same procedure is followed by reaching up through the access hole and making the bolt, washer, and nut connection. Here we see a closer view of both connections. The fuselage connection and the wing connection. The trim tab cables remain to be connected. Here is the left wing. Here are the cables running out through the wing. By reaching down through this access hole in the top of the wing, connection is made by means of a turnbuckle. Tracer wires attached to the ends of the cables aid in pulling the cables to the points of connection. The long cable, pulled through by tracer wire, is connected to the chain by reaching up through this access hole. At this opening, reach in and install the pulley guard with a clevis pin and cotter pin provided. Here is a closer view of the pulley guard, showing where the clevis pin is inserted. A safety wire, which has been fastened around the chain, is now removed, and the cable tension is adjusted to 35 pounds. With all wing connections now complete, the next step is to make preparations for checking out the operation of the landing gear. First, we check the fluid in the hydraulic reservoir. Pressure is then built up in the hydraulic system by using the hand pump in the cockpit until the indicator shows 1,000 pounds. The flaps and brakes are now bled according to standard technical orders. 90 pounds pressure is pumped into the upper chambers of the shock struts, putting the gauge on the valve to the lower chambers. Next, after making certain that all the switches in the cockpit are in the off position, the battery, which should be brought up to full charge, is installed. Then the crew chief is ready to direct the actual testing of the landing gear, which should be raised and lowered at least 3 times. In the first retraction of the gear, the crew chief should check to see that the inner door and strut fairings fit smoothly in the wing. The next complete operation to be checked is that of the landing gear warning light. This light should remain on while the gear is being extended and should go out when and only when the gear has reached the full downlock position. The third testing of the gear is made for the purpose of checking the operation of the transfer valve. The rear inflation valve is removed, the gauge is put on the front inflation valve, a pump is attached to the gauge, and 90 pounds pressure is pumped through the gauge into the lower chamber. The gear is retracted to the point where pressure is seen to drop in the gauge. That's enough. Then a bevel protractor is applied to the gear. If the gear is 6 degrees from vertical, or within a minimum of 5 degrees to a maximum of 10 degrees, the transfer valve is operating correctly. We can get ready now to roll the plane off the platform. To do that, we must transfer the weight of the plane from the platform to the landing gear. First, the air must be released from the lower chambers of the shock struts. The landing gear must be fully compressed and held in this position while the pits are almost completely filled in and the earth packed hard under the wheels. Now the man in the cockpit should park the brakes. The entire plane is then jacked up by pumping air into the lower chambers of the shock struts. To make the pumping job easier and to relieve strain on the pump, several men rock the plane by pushing up on the wing. The result is that the plane is lifted above the steel rest pads of the shipping brace. Once the weight of the plane has been transferred to the landing gear, the two center skids behind the shipping case bracket are sawed through, and the front section of the fuselage platform with the supporting irons is pulled forward and clear. Now we are ready to release the tail from its shipping case brace. In preparation for this, air is pumped into the tail wheel strut until the piston is completely extended. The man in the cockpit locks the tail wheel to prevent it from turning sideways. We must build a track for the tail wheel to run on. To do this, we make use of one of the stringer sections formerly used to carry the wing. It is sawed into 3 equal lengths and laid directly under the tail wheel in the manner shown here. The other stringer section is placed under the empennage jack pad. 8 men now lift the tail slightly to ease the tension on the tail shipping brace bolt. When the bolt is removed, the tail is slowly lowered until the wheel rests on the tail track. The stringer we just used to lift the tail can now be sawed through the middle, and the 2 sections placed in front of the platform to form a tail wheel ramp. The tow lines are made ready and fastened to the towing hole. Stop, not there. That's the uplock hook. Use the hole that's marked for towing. A jeep is mighty handy in pulling the plane away from the platform, but manpower can do the job if necessary. The short sections of tail track are moved progressively as the tail wheel rolls forward. During this roll-away operation, the man in the cockpit keeps a slight tension on the brakes to ensure slow, even movement of the plane. Here she comes down the ramp, looking more like a P-47 every minute. Now is the time for pre-flight adjustments and inspections of the landing gear shock struts. First, all of the air is released from the lower chambers to allow the strut pistons to be fully bottomed. Next, we remove the plug on the lower chamber to see if it contains the proper amount of fluid. If there is sufficient fluid in the cylinder, it will be found level with the plug opening. Now the strut chambers are checked for proper pressures. 90 pounds is correct for the upper,